another program of the Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us. This week we return again with leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Brigadier the Honorable David Granger. Welcome and good day to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
This week we focus on trafficking in persons. There was a recent report of young girls being trafficked in mining communities, and the leader of the opposition will shed some light on what would have occurred. His thoughts actually on how we solve that problem. Mr. Granger, I want to jump right into it. After that discovery, you made a statement in the National Assembly whereby you were looking at CURE, calling for a safe house to put these girls in. But before we talk about CURE, how do we stop trafficking in persons? Preventative measures?
I don't know that you could eradicate it completely, but we could certainly curb the practice, mainly by legislation and enforcement. Enforcement particularly by the officers of the state in the Guyana Police Force and in mines and forestry and other officials. Legislation is adequate. And there has been legislation to prevent or to prohibit trafficking in persons. I don't have a complaint about the legislation. But what we have found is that there's a permissive climate, a permissive attitude, because some people are of the view that when young women go in the hinterland, they are conscious of the consequences of their behavior. They took a conscious decision to go there. So whatever happens to them is not a matter for the state. The problem is that many of the girls who have been taken into the hinterland are underage, so it is a criminal problem. This is not a matter of consent between two adults, this is a matter of trafficking. It is quite clear that recruiters, whoever they may be, go into certain communities and look for girls who perhaps are in vulnerable circumstances. They might be poor, or they might be, destitute, and they say, well, look, come into the hinterland and we'll give you a job to work as a waitress in a nightclub or something like that. And of course, when they get in there, they find it's a completely different situation. Now, what do we recommend to bring this to an end? One, the Guyana Police Force has to be strengthened. The hinterland is the biggest part of the country. It occupies over 75% of our land space. That is what used to be called ENF divisions in the police force. There simply is not a sufficient number of policemen there. And we need to take a look at the vast areas. I mean, for example, the Cuyuni-Mazaruni region, referred to as Region 7, where a lot of trafficking takes place, is bigger than the Netherlands. So many people sitting down in Georgia do not understand the scale of the problem. And when we speak of policing the hinterland, we need to think of putting a very large number of boats, aircraft, all-terrain vehicles, as well as personnel on the ground there. And it is my view that we cannot try to curb the practice of trafficking unless we have more law enforcement assets and more law enforcement officers on the ground, especially in the Cuyuni-Mazaruni.
I'm happy you mentioned law enforcement, because I can remember not only in 2011 the campaign for the general elections, but also in 2012 you did before call for the police to be reorganized to deal with this problem. And from what you've just said, it seems that we're still lacking in that area. But have you seen any signs at all, of police being reorganized to deal with this problem?
There have been some signs, to be quite honest. I know that the government did pass legislation. The government did set up a ministerial task force on trafficking in persons. And there are several programs through particularly the Ministry of Human Services and to some extent the Ministry of Armed Affairs. So it is not as though nothing has been done, but what I'm saying is that the little that has been done is not effective. And much more could be done in order to ensure that the girls are protected. So what needs to be done at this point in time is for the police to be brought up to strength and for greater vigilance to be exercised on the people going in to those hinterland areas. And once it is detected that young girls are, underage persons are being taken into the hinterland, it must be assumed either that they are working, which means that child labor, which also means that it's prohibited, or that they're going to be exploited, which again means that there must be police enforcement. So I would like to see a lot more enforcement on the part of the administration. The legislation is in place, and there are sufficient structures. But what we discovered in the incident last week at Peruni is that the policeman is alleged to have been involved in the practice. So it's a question of who will watch the watchmen, because the watchmen themselves are committing the crimes. And this is one of the reasons why we're dissatisfied with the way the police force has been administered by Mr. Clement Rohi for the last 6 years that he's been there. Because this certainly is part of the problem that we're facing, a very serious problem.
I want to stay on this for a bit longer. You just said who will watch the watchmen. Is it that we're having a problem in the police force whereby the persons being recruited are not trained properly, or is it that we're not doing enough background checks on these people? Because if your job is to serve and protect and the public is afraid of you, how do we go from there, especially as it relates to this issue?
Well, you're quite right. When you ask the question, who will watch the watchman, we need to have a much more efficient police force. We need to start training policemen differently. We need to have more female police officers, and we need to have more assets in the hinterland, because actually much of the hinterland is administered from Ivleri. You do not have a senior command presence at Bartica, which is at the heart of the problem. Many of the mining enterprises have headquarters or pass through Bartica, because Bartica really, although it's not yet a town, it has police station, it has banks, it has a business sector, a thriving business sector, and we need to have police presence there in order to be able to go into the hinterland, use ATVs, use boats, use aircraft to patrol the hinterland more effectively. So a lot needs to come down to the quality of the police force, and I think we need to have a second look at the way policing is organized and conducted in the whole hinterland, but particularly in the Kuyuni-Mazruni area.
Is it fair to say that most of the persons discovered being trafficked, especially recently, are of Amerindian descent?
This has been the allegation, and I think it is fair to say it is certainly not exclusive, because I think, I don't want to use an incorrect expression, the scouts, or the talent scouts who go around looking to recruit these persons probably find girls in difficult circumstances. I understand that some were taken from the quarantine, some were taken from Maruka. So there is no way of determining exactly where the girls are trafficked from, but reports, anecdotal reports, suggest that many of them might be of indigenous ancestry. Some years ago, when I used to publish a magazine, a study was done by an Amerindian about Amerindian communities, and it was discovered that most of the girls on the Essequibo coast had been trafficked from Amerindian communities. But those were not going into mining areas, those were going into rum shops, restaurants, and hotels, and bars. But at that point in time, it was clear that the majority of people being trafficked were Amerindians. And this is because, number one, many of the Amerindian communities are still poor. Despite 20 years of PPP civic administration, we have not seen real development. We've seen a lot of gift giving. The PPP tends to share out sewing machines, or they give solar panels or ATVs. But these instruments, these tools, these assets don't really develop the communities as such. People want to get markets for their farm produce. People want jobs, and we're not getting that sort of thing from the PPP administration. So poverty has been a contributory factor. And even though young persons go to school and might receive the normal qualification in terms of CSEC or skill training, they can't get jobs. And when somebody comes saying, look, I will give you a job at such and such a place, I pay you a few pennyweights of gold, the eyes light up. And when they go there, they discover that instead of heaven, they find hell.
What about sentiments that some of these young women know exactly what it is that they're doing? It's not necessarily trafficking, but, and of course this is not in any way to reduce the problem of trafficking in persons, but persons out there would say that, they're getting themselves involved in prostitution. Your response to those?
Well, we need to have an investigation. We need to have an inquiry. We need to collect data on this crime, because we keep getting reports from the Guyana Women Miners Organization. They do bring out real human beings, and I have been in touch with the chairman of the region, Mr. Bradford, Gordon Bradford. He was chairman before, and then he took a break and somebody else was chairman. But I remember reading of cases like 10 years ago in which he himself was instrumental in rescuing girls, a pretty large number of girls, from the hinterland, the near hinterland, if you want to call it that. And he had them brought to Bartica. So yes, we need the infrastructure is there, but we need also to ensure that all of the agencies, for example, the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is responsible for law enforcement, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, which is the main protector, if you want to say that, of the Amerindian people, the Ministry of Human Services, which of course is responsible for welfare directly, and the Ministry of National Resources and Environment, and also the Ministry of Local Government. So there needs to be an interministerial organization which seeks to protect the girls from their plight.
Recently in the National Assembly, you called for a safe house to, in a sense, as a measure of curing the young girls, if I may put it that way. What has convinced you that Guyana is in the position to not only implement or create such a system, but upkeep it?
Well, it has been, that program has been a recipient of funding before. It is nothing new. The Guyana Women Miners Organization has actually called for it. I think the Red Thread organization called for it. So I wouldn't claim that it's a new program that I invented. I am aware of newspaper reports in which the government has received money. In fact, they designated a building in Mahaika for this purpose. Now, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, but when you bring girls out of the hinterland, the first place they stop at is Bartica. And that is where you need them to stay, because in the Peruni incident, we saw reports in the newspaper that the girls were actually made to sleep on the floors of the police station. Some were sitting on benches. Now, I described this as double jeopardy. A, they were mistreated in the hinterland, and B, they were mistreated in the police station. The police station is not a hotel. And what I discussed with the chairman of the region and also with the president of the Guyana Women Miners Organization is that a safe house should be created for the girls to stay. Immediately they're brought out of that harmful environment. Yes, we can afford it. Yes, the region, that is the officials of the RDC for Region 7, say that it is possible. Yes, it's desirable. Yes, money has been provided in the past. But no, the government has not done anything to actually set it up. In fact, one former Minister of Human Services said it's a waste of time. It's useless trying to set up a safe house, because it is not justifiable, economically justifiable. I disagree. I feel that even if it's just one girl, when she is brought out, she must have a safe place to stay, she must have a clean bed to sleep in, and she must be available to be reintegrated in our family, because this is not a case of prostitution. You see, when you go to the problem with the wrong mindset, you end up with the wrong solution. What the evidence suggests is that these are underage girls who have been fooled into going into the hinterland with promises that they will get paid in so many pennyweights of gold and they'll be fabulously rich. It isn't true. They're not prostitutes who are going there to just, make a living by prostituting themselves. These are young girls who have been fooled. And I do believe that we can afford safe houses and that we can do it. And if the government doesn't want to do it, I will work with the non-governmental organizations to do it. The government has failed to do it for the last decade.
I don't want to sound pessimistic or negative here, but you make it sound that it's going to be, as though it's going to be easy for them to, even after being in the safe house, to be reintegrated into society, into their families. Why do you think that, that's possible for them to not want to go back to that life that they would have been taken out of?
Well, I'm not taking anything for granted. My premise is that a crime has been committed. That is, underage girls, girls who should be at school or at home, have been fooled, and have been taken to the hinterland and have been sexually exploited. It would not be easy, but it is the responsibility of the state. It is not the responsibility of a Partnership for National Unity. It's not the responsibility of the Guyana Women Miners Organization. It's not the responsibility of any NGO. It is the responsibility of the government of Guyana to look after that child. And it wouldn't be easy, but the child may have come from difficult circumstances. The child may be homeless or destitute. The child may have lost both parents. But that is a problem that can be solved by the people who collect our taxes. They're the ones who now have to create an environment in which that child could be reintegrated. I do not believe that at age 13 or 14, a child can consciously say, I want to be a whore. And that is the problem we're facing. The government is taking the position that this is something that is inevitable, that this is something that people want. I don't take that position. I think that people have choices, and if they were given a life in which they can pursue their education, they can do their CSEC, and they can have a normal career, have a normal family, I don't think they'll go into that life. It's not an easy life. And many women end up broken or beaten. In fact, a few months ago, one was killed, I think, at Arakaka because of an abusive relationship. No country could build its future. No country could provide a good life for its girl children, on prostitution.
Even though government continues to indicate whether, be it through the media or through their actions, that look, we don't have, or I should say, trafficking in persons is not prevalent in Guyana. After you made your statement in the National Assembly recently, we saw sentiments from Alliance for Change, Mrs. Kathy Hughes, and then of course some sentiments also coming from the Prime Minister. Is that an indication that the three political parties will work together to bring some sort of solution, or at least begin a plan to solve this problem?
Well, a Partnership for National Unity is always prepared to work with other parties, other partners, for the public good, the public interest. So I make that commitment right off. But right now it needs governmental action. It needs a response by the central government. And that is not something that the government could escape, the responsibility for that action. But APNU doesn't have the resources. AFC doesn't have the resources. It's a government function. It's a law enforcement function. But we're prepared to work with them, yes.
In the event that you continue to be ignored, how far, because you just said that the APNU doesn't have the resources, how far are you willing to go with the non-governmental organization, especially if you should be approached by one of them to put this plan in motion?
Well, we have already started to cooperate with them, and we will continue to work with them. As I said, we do have some influence in Bartica, and we have advised the persons concerned to approach businessmen for mattresses and for food to assist the girls when they come to that place. A building will be provided. If the government doesn't want to provide it, we will make sure that the building is provided. Our concern is the welfare of our citizens, and I think we will win this campaign to get the girls out of abusive situations and to get them reintegrated in normal lives in their places of normal residence.
If I can talk about the culprits, or I should say the perpetrators a bit, is it that in Guyana some of these people go around to the different communities and, if I can use the term, prey on the vulnerable, our girls and women?
Yes, that is happening. That is happening, and we see that people have been going to, at least from the reports from the girls, people have been carrying out, recruitment exercises and taking the girls away. So we can put an end to it because the destinations are known. I mean, they're not being trafficked to Kokwani or Aichuni, they're trafficked to gold mining areas. And we need to do what I would call a commission of inquiry, confidential, because you need to speak to the girls to find out where they came from, who spoke with them, who advised them to go to those areas, and try to dismantle the whole network. As I said, it's been going on a long time. It's nothing new, and I was aware of this problem about over 10 years ago. And what I want to do is make sure that we have enough information to go forward and do the type of enforcement that the problem demands. And it's not happening now, and the government seems to be very reluctant to conduct inquiries. But an inquiry simply provides the information that is needed for policymakers to make certain decisions. And I feel this is the way that we will go in the National Assembly, to call for an inquiry, to have this matter investigated thoroughly, because it is quite clear that there's been some complicity on the part of the law enforcement agency. I mentioned 5 different ministries, and they can't all be unaware of what is happening. And in particular, the Ministry of Home Affairs has a great burden because we realize that police are involved. And whenever you see certain types of crimes in the hinterland, the police have a very good idea what the crimes are and who's committing those crimes. And that is why we took action against Mr. Rohi, calling for certain security sector reforms. And what happened now as a sort of a spill-off of the incident in Peruni is that the policeman is now before the court. Because nobody else is before the court except a policeman. The person who should be protecting the girls is before the courts. I'm not judging him, but it is quite likely that he would not have been charged unless he had an idea of what's going on there. So we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of the work has to be done within the police force itself. But to come back to one of your earlier question, yes, we need to have an interagency approach because the problem can be countrywide. Now, let me add this. Although we are concerned with the mining areas, and although we might be concerned geographically, and although we might be concerned with gender, I mean, it is true that most of the victims are women, and although we might be concerned with ethnicity, that is, many of the persons involved are Armenians, there are other areas. Because of poverty, people are routinely being removed from their normal place of residence and being taken as cheap forced labor into other areas. Sometimes you go into a restaurant and you see people working and you say, where are you from? I say, well, why are you so far from home? And then you discover that they might have been trafficked. So we don't know the size of the problem. And what I'm appealing to the government to do, and what we'll do through the National Assembly, is ensure that some commission is established to look into these matters. Because obviously, the government cannot be relied upon to police itself.
Your thoughts now on trafficking in persons outside of Guyana. Is there any way that we can somehow control that?
Yes, there is a way we can control it, because almost at the same time of the Peruni incident, we can say we discovered the Barbados incident, in which a Guyanese was brought before the courts in Barbados accused of trafficking girls. Again, this might be a slightly different matter because the persons might be older, they're not underage, and some of them might be consciously going as prostitutes, knowing that they are going to sell their bodies. But what we've discovered is that the circumstances under which they are moved, could be criminal. For example, the passports are taken away and then they're forced to work to pay back the person who recruited them, and the whole relationship is abusive. It's not a free migration of skills. And yes, there is trafficking, and anecdotal information suggests that quite a few of the women are trafficked to Barbados and some to Suriname. Again, we need to find out the size of the problem if you're going to bring trafficking to an end.
Okay. All right, sir. Thank you very much. That's on the trafficking in persons note. I know this is not the topic, but I just feel it necessary to get a response from the opposition leader. I mean, this is the second incident for 2013 where we saw a child being murdered by a stepfather, and this time a 14-year-old. And I'm bringing it up because we are talking about a vulnerable group in society. If I can get a reaction from you, sir, about the 14-year-old who was stabbed to death allegedly by her stepfather.
Well, we're all shocked. I think the entire Guyanese society is outraged. But as you say, this is not the first murder of this sort. And we need to see the incident as being part of a pattern of a very low level of policing. You know, the administration set up something called neighborhood police, which is not neighborhood police really, and community policing. But the focus has not been on protecting the community. And this is my complaint with some of these programs that have been invented by the Ministry of Home Affairs. We talk about citizen security. We're looking at small communities. The person was obviously, the victim was obviously living in an area might be described as a squatter settlement, if I know the area. But if you're talking about community policing, you're talking about the regular police being more familiar with the communities that they're responsible for. And there should be some feedback between the citizens, the residents of those communities, and the police. Community policing is not walking around with a bicycle or a baton and a flashlight. It is a relationship between the residents and the police. The point I'm trying to make is that if it was clear that there was abuse, it could have been brought to the attention of the authorities. They would have known that the girl is living under certain conditions, and she could have been removed from that environment. But that didn't happen. So we're looking at a different style of policing. We're looking at a more sympathetic, we're looking at a more caring policing, and it's not happening now under the PPP setting.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Granger. Viewers, this has been another edition of The Public Interest. Once again, I am Malika Ramsey saying thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.